Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and before I get into all those videos that are going to wrap up 2019 in general, my best books, my worst books, how did I do with my reading goals, I still want to wrap up what I read in December of 2019, just so that we all know all the books that I read in 2019. Well, if you have watched all of my wrap-ups, which you probably didn't. But in any case, I still want to wrap up December of 2019 first thing before I go into my best and worst books videos. Which, by the way, just so that they don't drag too much into January, I probably will have more videos in the next 1 or 2 weeks. We'll see how I can work my filming and editing schedule, but just saying, there might be more videos than the 2 a week that I managed to do in the past month. Wow, I'm actually quite surprised. I ended the year on a bang. Anyway, let me get into all the books that I read in December. I'm actually, for some reason, the start of December was so long ago and I'm really surprised what I read this month. But yeah, anyway, let's get into the first book. The first book I read in December is Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, which is the second book in the Skyward series. I do not remember if I filmed a review on this. I don't think I did. But anyway, this is Brandon Sanderson's YA kind of space opera style series. There's 2 books out so far. Starsight came out at the end of November and I absolutely loved it. This series follows Spencer, who lives on a planet that is constantly attacked by aliens, and as such the most honorable thing to be is to be a pilot and to fight those aliens, which is Spencer's dream since her father was also a pilot. Her problem though is that her father, during one of the attacks of the aliens, fled and had to be shot down by his colleagues, so he kind of went down in history as the biggest coward, which is why at the beginning of this book Spencer is denied entrance to the piloting school. And yeah, it's kind of Spencer working her way around this and making it into school after all, and the hardships she has to face because of her father's legacy and also the discoveries she makes. And there's a talking AI spaceship, and there's Doomslug, and there's great relationships. I reread the first book last month, and so of course I went straight into the second book as soon as it came out, because the first book was my favorite book of last year, and this book is definitely gonna make my favorites list as well. This year, just a little spoiler, although not even last year, 2018 and 2019, you know what I mean. Anyway, did I like this more than Skyward? Personally, probably not, because there's some stuff that happens in this book that I won't get into that leads to my favorite dynamic relationship from the first book not having as much of a spotlight in this book, and there's actually not really that much of it in here at all, which made me really sad. But on the other hand, there's a lot of amazing things in this book. We learn a lot more about the aliens that are attacking Detritus, the planet that Spencer is from. There's a lot of interesting things concerning kind of who are the evil guys, what happens when you just misunderstand other people and just don't know anything about other people, what prejudices can lead to, which kind of was also part of the themes of the first book. But if you go into this, I wouldn't expect a book like the first book. It's just completely different. It's kind of like Mistborn, if you have read Mistborn, where the first, second and third book obviously are part of a series, but you still have such a different focus on different parts of world building and of human interactions in each of the books, where the first one is kind of a heist story, the second one is a lot more political, and then the third one is a classic fantasy battle type of finale book. And you have similar things here, where in the first one you just had Spencer dealing with her own people and dealing with the prejudices her own people have against her, and kind of finding her own way, finding herself, going through a lot of character development, and just it was very much focused on her. And in this book it's more about her prejudices against the aliens and how that relationship changes her as well. and I just love this. I just love this slight kind of shift of focus, and how you still kind of have this theme of prejudice within the books, but just the focus is shifted. And I just really, really love that. Spencer doesn't go through as much character development in this book as in the first book, obviously, because like her character development in the first book was crazy, but she still goes through like smaller changes in her personality. And again, she started the first book as a person who was very certain of herself, very certain of her place in life, and of her place in society, and of her views on society, and that got challenged a lot in the first book, and it's even more challenged in this book. So yeah, definitely recommend the series, although maybe don't start now, maybe wait until like late 2020, since we will only get the third book in 2021. And this book ends on a major cliffhanger, and I'm so bummed that I have to wait so long for the next book. Next, I have 2/2.5 rereads. I actually had quite a few rereads this month. I think more than half the books that I read this month were rereads, which I think is quite common for December for BookTube. But anyway, I started my reread of the Black Jewel series by Anne Bishop. I read Daughter of the Blood and Heir to the Shadows, like the whole book. And then I started Queen of Darkness, and then I decided that the end of Queen of Darkness always bums me out too much, and I'm always so sad after I read it. So I decided to just read the happy parts of Queen of Darkness, and I kind of just half read it. So yeah, this started my reread for the Black Jewel series, which is currently still going on since the 10th book now is coming out in March. And I want to reread the whole series before I jump into that. I have 6 books left, and the original trilogy is now done with this. And I just love how, like, this copy of the Black Jewels, my copy of the Black Jewels, is just falling apart. Another reread that I started a very long time ago this year, I think back in March, was Eldest by Christopher Paolini. I finally finished this reread. Man, it took me a long time. And I was planning on rereading this in any case, because I still have the third book of the Eragon series on my shelves, and I intend to at least read the third book, and maybe the fourth, we'll see. But I had to reread the second book before that, because I couldn't remember anything from this book aside from the fact that I was really bored the first time I read it, and I was still really bored, maybe slightly less so, but most of this book is just Eragon learning how to be a dragon rider and not a lot happening. And I kind of love training sequences a lot, and when you kind of get into it, but the thing that happens in this book is just you spend a whole lot on doing nothing. You don't see that much of Eragon's training sequences, in my opinion. What I was surprised though was, I remember the first time I read it, I really hated Roran's parts, and this time around I actually looked forward to them, because at least I got some action, and I didn't dislike Roran as much as I disliked him the first time I read this. I still dislike Aya. I think Aya is the character where you see most that this whole series is a series that was started by a 15-year-old boy, because she's kind of like this mirage of a perfect, strong woman, but she doesn't really have any personality, to be honest, and I can't see what Eragon finds in her at all. And yeah, it's just... I gave it 2.5 stars. I still want to try read the third one, but wasn't the best reread ever. Then next I read Girls of Storm and Shadow by Natasha Gnan, which is the second book in the Girls of Paper and Fire series. This series follows Lei, who belongs to the Paper caste, which is the lowest caste in her world. The highest caste is the Demon caste, and every year 13 girls are chosen to become concubines of the king. 13 girls from the Paper caste, which are then called Paper Girls, and Lei at the beginning of the first book is chosen to become one of those Paper Girls. It's also a book in which the main romance is a sapphic romance, which I really enjoyed in the first book, and even though it's written a lot like a YA novel, I wouldn't recommend it to especially young YA readers, and it's probably more along the lines of a new adult novel, because Lei is a paper girl, since she is supposed to be the concubine to the Demon King, or a concubine to the Demon King. It does deal a lot with topics like sexual violence, sexual abuse, and the trauma one has from being sexually violated. And that is actually also what I wouldn't say enjoyed most or liked most in this book, but what I appreciated most in the second book, that a lot of the book deals with Lei's traumas concerning her time as a paper girl, and also Ren's time as a paper girl. And it's not as in a lot of fantasy books where something horrible happens to the main character and then you could see a little bit of the drama, but suddenly it's all gone. Just throughout the whole book, there isn't a lot of like progress made in Lei's drama. It's just something that repeatedly happens in flashbacks to her, where she just kind of has nightmares and just suddenly snaps out of reality because she's just still so petrified with what happened to her. So yeah, that's what I appreciated most about this book. Sadly, there wasn't a lot else that I enjoyed, so I only ended up giving it 3 stars. I thought that there was a lot of like nothing that happened in this book. I didn't like a lot of the themes along the lines of sometimes the goal is what makes the stuff you do okay, and if you have like an honorable goal, then you can basically do anything and it's yay, just do whatever you want. And also the thing that I was disappointed by the most is I really enjoyed the romance in the first book, but I thought the chemistry in this book just wasn't there anymore, and I just thought it wasn't believable that these 2 girls were in any way in love. I don't know if that was because of the trauma that both of them went through, but I just didn't particularly enjoy that, and so yeah, sadly a bit disappointed. I will still read the next book, but it's kind of on my questionably if I will finish that series pile. Then I read a book that shows that it was a good idea that I didn't film my best of 2019 videos in December, because it definitely belongs on that list, and that is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I won't get into too much of my thoughts on this because I do have a whole review on this, and if you want to know my thoughts, I will leave it linked down below and up there. This was one of the winners of this year's Booker Prize, and I think deservedly so, even though I only read the other winner and none of the other books. So I don't know how valid my opinion is, but this basically just follows the story of 12 different people living in Britain during the 20th and 21st century, and they are all in some way connected. Most of them are women, one of them is a non-binary, all other are women, and that's why it's called Girl, Woman, Other. And also most of them have some type of Black heritage. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this book overall, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I read one of my TBR chair picks from December, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, another classic, and I really enjoyed it. I was so surprised by this book because it's not really like the story we know. There's no villages with pitchforks, there's no crazy doctor like building a monster. You don't really get a lot of the building of the monster. It's mostly just Frankenstein's monster is created at the very beginning of the book, and the rest of the book is Victor Frankenstein kind of dealing with the ramifications of what he has done, and he really just regrets building this monster. And at the same time, the monster is a monster but also isn't a monster. He's really kind of pitiful, and I kind of pity him a lot, but then also not really, because he does do some really monstrous things. So yeah, it's just a really interesting question on humanity and what it means to be human, and like who is the monster and who isn't. Is it society that makes one a monster, or are some people just inherently monstrous? And yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Then I read one book this year that wasn't a novel, but that's a play, and that is Faust Part 1 by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is kind of the Shakespeare of German literature. He has a lot of really, really famous and well-loved plays, and Faust kind of is his Hamlet, so to speak, his great tragedy. And I'm going to see it in January, so I thought that I would read it first. This book is a bind-up of part 1 and part 2 because Faust is written in 2 parts, but I did only read part 1 in December, and I'm probably going to read part 2 in January. And I can't really give it a rating because I'm not used to reading plays, and I think just the way plays are supposed to be absorbed is through seeing them and not through reading them. So there's just some things when I'm not used to reading plays where I was just confused what's going on right now, because you don't get to see kind of the scene around the dialogue. But yeah, for those of you who don't know what Faust is about, Faust is probably like the most retold story in German literature generally. It's probably one of the first retellings ever, and the central story always is about a doctor, a person, an alchemist. It kind of depends what exactly he is, depending on who writes the story, who is either bored with life or needs more knowledge or whatever, and so he makes a deal with the devil to gain whatever it is he needs. And I wrote my final paper in German literature for my school on Faust, so I had read the first part before, and this was a reread for me. And why I love Faust especially is because firstly it's based on a real person. So there was this person who was an alchemist in the Middle Ages in Europe, in Germany, and he apparently blew himself up during an experiment, and people just said it's because he made a deal with the devil and the devil finally got him. So yeah, and it started, the first iteration of Faust was also back in the Middle Ages, was written by a monk, which was still very much preachy, and Faust was a bad person. Then Christopher Marlowe, who was one of the contemporaries of Shakespeare, also wrote a version of Faust in which Faust gave his soul in exchange for knowledge. In Goethe's Faust, it's more for just experiences, to find the perfect moment. Faust is bored with life. Faust feels like he knows everything already, he has found out everything already, and he's just sad and just wants to find the perfect moment, the perfect experience. And if the devil manages to give him that experience, he is allowed to take his soul. Then there's other iterations where it's about Faust wanting to know the truth about humanity, or the secret at the center of humanity, and it's just really interesting. Maybe I will just also use 2019 to read more iterations again of Faust and do a whole video on how they differ and everything. Tell me if you would be interested in that. But yeah, I still highly recommend reading any Faust really, but Goethe's is especially like well received and well written, and I really enjoy it. And then my last reread of the year was, I kind of gave myself a little Christmas present, and that is the 10-year anniversary edition of Clockwork Angel, and it's so pretty, and there's like illustrations inside and everything. Look at that. But yeah, I reread Clockwork Angel, which is the first book in the For All Devices series. I'm going to try to reread the other 2 books as well before The Last Hours comes out, but yeah, highly enjoyed it. It's probably like, I can tell now that it's probably like not as well written as I thought when I first read it. But I just love Jem and Tessa and Will and Charlotte and Henry and everyone so much that it's still a 5-star read for me, and I do not care. And yeah, anyway, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below what you read in December. All links to my social media are in the description box, so I'll also go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!